I'm going to record. All right, I'll say welcome to ACTL meeting, March 2nd, 2022. And tonight we're going to have multiple committee reports, starting with the math committee. And before that report begins, we're going to have a presentation. And I'm sorry, Bridget, I'm going to forget the name. I'll let you do the introduction.
Sure. I want to thank all of our staff liaisons for attending, and looking forward to this evening. I want to introduce Shannon Ellis, who is our supervisor in the Office of Mathematics, who's been very much part of the process in addressing our Virginia Mathematics Pathways Initiative. And there's been some changes and ebb and flow with the VMPI, and so we thought it might be helpful to hear Shannon give us an update. So I think, Shannon, I saw that you were here, so I'm going to pass the mic over to you.
Okay, I started talking on mute, of course. Happy Wednesday evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. So many of you probably know already, and for those who don't, the governor issued an order, I believe on January 15th, ending the work of the Virginia Mathematics Pathways Initiative, and shortly after rescinded the website and the information pertaining to VMPI, and the work is currently under review. That doesn't, however, change the fact that the curriculum is being evaluated and revised. On Monday, the application closed for educators who are interested in that work. And we had several applicants in Arlington, some very amazing teachers and coaches who applied to be a part of the curriculum revision. And so hopefully some or all of them are selected to revise that work. My understanding, because a lot of people didn't recognize that the work was driven by higher ed, and my understanding is that the goal is still to modernize the curriculum, to also create additional high school pathways for students. And so there will most likely still be some shifts, but maybe not as extensive as some of the essential concepts work. I have to say some of the rationale for halting the work seems like some miscommunication about the goals of the work, and hopefully that will come out with the review. So that's pretty much the updates. Hopefully still modernizing the curriculum. That work, again, will occur this summer and will be proposed in the fall, and then submitted shortly thereafter for approval. So that is all.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm sorry I missed your comments, but I will listen to them on the recording.
Okay.
Bridget, for kicking us off. I don't know what happened, but I rebooted and hopefully I'm back and we are good to go.
You sound good right now. You're not breaking up, so that's good.
Thank you. Okay, so we do have 4 committees going this evening, as you all know, and in order to keep things moving along, we'll go right into those committee reports. And the first one up will be the math committee, and I see Rachel Werley on my screen, and she can take it away.
Hello, thank you very much. As mentioned, I'm Rachel Werley. I just got married a few weeks ago, so my name will be changing on the report that you guys have. Additionally, because I just got married a few weeks ago, I was not here for our February meeting. So I do have a revised, my cat is on my lap, by the way. I do have a revised report based on the VMPI changes and some other changes that have happened since our January meeting. And that those revisions will be included in the final submission at the end of this year. So briefly, I just want to go over our main recommendations and some background to them, as well as what we plan on working on in the future. we are requesting, excuse me, we're requesting two things. The first is a full K through 12 instructional resource adoption. That would be what is supposed to happen, I believe every 6 years, where the state updates the curriculum and then the county goes through a resource adoption to make sure the resources that the teachers are using and that are getting handed out to students matches that curriculum. The reason we have included this in here is because the last time that Arlington included this resource adoption in its budget was 11 years ago. We did, fortunately, finally, get funds for an out of cycle, kind of off of the curriculum update from the state, out of cycle resource adoption that is happening now, and should hopefully, fingers crossed, be ready hopefully by the fall for students and teachers to use. So we initially put this in here for the January meeting to say, you guys have preliminarily approved this funding. Please, please, please do not take it away. We are desperate. We need these things. They have since approved it. It's going forward. We're leaving it in because it's critical that this doesn't happen again. It's insane that it took 11 years for math to get a resource adoption. Over half of Arlington teachers have said in surveys that they use non-county provided resources as opposed to the county provided ones because they're so out of date. So we want to include this in here to keep this in mind for future so that it is there when people reference back, because we do not ever want to have this happen again. And we hope this also doesn't happen in any other subjects. Again, there's some stuff in there about VMPI. That language will obviously be changed. The state is going through a curriculum update. I believe it's going to start the 2023-24 school year is when the changes should be taking effect. So in a few years, and we will obviously be requesting for additional resource updates to make sure we're on track with that curriculum so we can get back onto the regular cycle that all the other subjects are on. So that is our first recommendation. The second one is that we are recommending the county hire more math specialists to work with both teachers and students. So we are categorizing math specialists, we're breaking them out into two different groups, math interventionists and math coaches. The math interventionists are the more traditional, what you'd more traditionally think of, where they're sitting down with students, they're interacting with students directly and helping the teacher as well interact with them. And the math coaches are coaches for the teachers to help them better address student needs on their case-by-case basis. One thing we want to really push is that the math coaches, while they don't directly interact with students, they do impact them greatly. A math interventionist who's working directly with students can only work with so many students at once, right? Like they're sitting down one-on-one with them. They're not working in a big group inherently based on their job. But a math coach, in talking to one teacher, can impact all of that teacher's students. Studies have also shown that having 2 FTEs of a coach is what can really provide positive impact to students. And if you have less than that, it's not as much of a positive impact to students' scores. Right now, not even every school is guaranteed a 1.0 FTE every year, which makes it very difficult for the position to be filled. If it's only a half FTE, it makes it difficult to fill it if it's not guaranteed each year. Like, hey, yes, we want to hire you for this job, but sorry, you might not have that job next year because the funding might go away. All of these things have hindered the ability to really cement this as a resource for our teachers. So that's why we're asking for the additional FTEs for math specialists, both interventionists and coaches. So those are our 2 formal recommendations. At the end, we have a brief blurb about future work that we're going to be looking into as we move forward, pertaining to teacher training requirements. Right now, teachers, even math teachers, are not required to take any professional development for math. So that's something that we'll be looking more into next year. And with that, I will open it up for questions.
Thanks, Rachel. If folks want to drop questions in the chat, that's probably the best way. And if we we'll try to group any questions that are similar, or we can use a raised hand, because I see Dana has a hand up. So.
Sorry, I'm going to try to observe a lot tonight because it's my first go at this, but I did have a question that did just come up when it comes to the FTEs. And I'm wondering if any thought or consideration has gone into using the world of Zoom to help answer some of these questions. If someone can be hired on an FTE basis and work via Zoom with a collection of teachers from schools, or a collection of teachers across the county, and then the same with the coaches. If students, they might not even be necessarily in the same school, but they might be able to be grouped together based on their abilities or their particular areas that need intervention, and perhaps maybe small group sessions via Zoom or Teams could help address that with maybe 3 to 5 students per teacher.
Thanks, Dana.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That is a great idea. We had not considered that. I don't know if the county is. Shannon, if you are still on, do you have an answer?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, because you guys can't hear me. Can't see me automatically. So I'll just jump into that. So we have recognized that virtual learning does work for some kids and doesn't work for a lot of kids. So when you talk about intervening with students in small group virtually, yes, of course, again, that will work for some kids. However, we recognize that for a lot of our kids, especially our students who have historically had challenges meeting grade level expectations within a year, had a lot of challenges virtually. When we talk about the different learning modes, a lot of times manipulatives are used, very strategic, on the spot addressing of student needs based on kind of what they're writing on pen and paper and what the teacher can see. To address that is really critical for a lot of our students. So again, that would be an option, but it's definitely not the answer. As far as the math coaches, in addition to working with CLTs to plan, to look at data, to think through instructional strategies, lessons, etc., they're also offering on the spot job embedded professional learning. I don't know if people got a chance to see the elementary video that aired a few weeks ago, but there was a video of a coach working with a class, and it was real live video. Nothing was planned there. It was on the spot. But I appreciated the fact that people got to see a coach in action, actually modeling for the teacher and offering professional learning on the spot based on what she noticed. And so that's the advantage of having that face-to-face. In addition to that CLT, you have that on the spot modeling, you have that job embedded professional learning that, again, in the case of virtual learning, they could offer that in a virtual environment. But when we're thinking about what's going to work for all of our students, most of our students will be face-to-face in a brick and mortar school. Right now, we do have a coach at the VLP, which is amazing. And she is doing everything that she can for teachers. And again, is limited based on what she's able to do virtually. So I just kind of wanted to respond to that. That would absolutely work in some cases, but in most cases, we definitely need someone who is there.
Thanks. Let me just say thank you to Sarah Putnam. So the CLT is an acronym that not everyone knows. So that means Collaborative Learning Team. And sorry, that was Bridget that put that in. And I want to follow up on Maureen's question in the chat, Rachel, about whether you are recommending 2 each math interventionists and math coaches per school for a total of 4 people, which seems like a big jump from the current numbers if appendix, when looking at appendix
Yes.
A. I was looking at the same thing, and I would add to Maureen's question just to say, it looks like the current elementary school, at least, it's not like a planning factor involved. It's simply just a half-time position at all but one elementary school. So I just want to confirm that that also is correct.
Yes, so currently the budget allocation is the 0.5 at each elementary school, and the principals are shifting their budgets around, and they are scrambling over the summer, and they are taking money from elsewhere in their budget and putting it to the math coaches so they can get up to a 1, and sometimes, as you can see, up to a 2 or 1.5, because they recognize how important these math coaches are and how necessary they are. But right now, yes, the current budget allocation is 0.5, and we are asking for much more than that, up to the 4.0. One of the reasons we decided to go up to the 4.0, if you were to look back at our recommendations, at least since I've been on the committee, which is 4 years, but even going back even further, I think probably for the last like 6 or 7 years, we have consistently over and over said to the board, we need more coaches. And we've tried to say, hey, just 1.0, just give us a little something. It's never worked. And so we're kind of at a point where it's like, you know what, if we need you guys to hear us, and we need you to hear how critical this is. Clearly just asking for a little bump and trying to go a piece at a time isn't working. Especially when you consider the fact that the impact studies that have been done say that more than 1 is really what's necessary per school to have that large impact. So that's why we're making a big jump. It's based on the data that we have on the studies of how important these roles are, and also based on the fact that we've asked for 1.0 before and they've decided that that wasn't important enough. So we're really hoping that the message gets across this year, because this has been one of MAC's consistent recommendations for almost a decade.
Other questions that, if you want to raise your hand or put your question in the chat. Yes, Dana.
Thought it'd be better stated than chatted. So I guess I tend to be a little bit of an out of the box thinker here. So I'm just wondering if anyone did the cost benefit analysis of looking at intervention, like an interventionist or a set of math interventionists in the terms of after school enrichment. So, you know, growing up in the 80s, we often had after school tutoring, and then the county would provide busing home after that. So I didn't know if instead of working or hiring, say, a position for part-time during the day to work with a certain, with a certain number of students in a school, if the benefit would be putting the cost to working with a tutoring program and doing math enrichment after school, and then helping the kids get home via transportation.
So I can chime in
Shannon,
here.
yeah.
So at many of our sites, we do offer some after school support, and it is beneficial for students who are able to attend. We have to remember that staffing is still going to be required for that. In addition, there are factors that make it challenging for some of our students to extend their day at school. So some are able, and that's great. I think one thing that we have to consider for our students in the public school, every single student and their academic growth is our responsibility during the school day. And yes, we can offer some things after school in addition to their regular school day, but our responsibility is during the school day. And so ensuring that we have what we need to address the needs of our students, the variety of learners that we have, students with some significant challenges during the school day is really important. So again, that's something that, yes, we are already doing for students, and it is not enough. And we also have to make sure that we're able to meet students' needs without extending their day or requiring them to stay after school. But I do appreciate the out of the box thinking. And I've been working in mathematics at this point, I think 24 or 25 years, and I've thought about a lot of things that are out of the box. And it's really important that we continue to drive home to everyone the importance of mathematics instruction, the importance of numeracy, what the recent studies that are coming out is telling us about students and the importance of numeracy for students, especially in the early grades, and how well it predicts outcomes for students in all areas. And we have to say as a county that mathematics has to be a priority, and we have to show in our actions that it's a priority by how we budget, similarly to how we budget for ELA and reading. I think we've made the assumption for a long time that funding reading it is the only critical thing for our students, and making sure that we have reading specialists, multiple reading specialists in each building is what's best for our students. Mathematics is equally as important. And now there's a lot of data and research to validate that. So I just have to say that piece too. Keeping that in mind and driving that home, that numeracy is in fact as important as literacy, and making sure that our priorities and our budget speak to that.
Thank you, Shannon. Let's, we just have like 2 minutes left. So let me go to.
I can address some of these questions really quickly in the chat, if that works.
Okay,
So
sure. I was just going to.
Oh, go ahead.
I was
just
just
going to add that last question, answer that last question about principals. So I can tell you that principals will be delighted. They are also very open about the desire to have these positions. Although some schools are budgeted at a 0.5 allocation for math coach, for example, we have several schools that have 2.0, which means they're funding 1.5 of those positions. And some of them have also found funding for interventionist. So I have to say that principals would be more than delighted. I can speak to that for that question that was there.
Thanks. I want to jump in quickly and just say, because Dima had a comment about, which was the same comment that I was making about planning factors, which is related to whether it would be more amenable perhaps and more and kinder to the budget perhaps if it was if these positions were connected with the number of students in a school in terms of the number of FTEs. Rachel, do you comment on that?
Yeah, so the reason we did not budget it that way is because the number of students in a school doesn't correlate to the need for math coaches and math interventionists. And what I mean by that is the schools are not evenly distributed in the students that are doing well and are doing poorly. Some schools have fewer students and they need a lot more help. Some schools, and it also varies year by year. And so it can be very tricky, and you can run into some issues by doing it in that way. The reason we want to do a 4.0 across is, again, because the 2.0 has been shown to be the kind of sweet number that should be hit. And because at that point, if we get 2.0 everywhere, kind of getting to Sarah's point, if a teacher or if a principal decides it's really necessary for their school because they need extra help, they could potentially add more to their budget in ways on a school by school basis. But the reality is that the 2.0 for each specialist and for the interventionists and for the coaches would be helpful and necessary for students across the board.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. And if folks do have additional questions, please reach out to Rachel and or Shannon. And obviously you can also drop questions in the chat. Although as we move forward into our next committee, we should probably try to keep ourselves focused on the topic at hand. So thank you, Rachel. Thank you to the math committee. If there's any math committee members here this evening, really grateful to have all of your hard work in this area. I am going to move us, and I am looking for Caroline on my screen.
I am subbing for Caroline tonight.
Todd, I am looking
Yes.
for Todd on my screen. So he's here from the Social Studies Committee. Thank you. And,
Yeah, I'm going to try to sub for her. It's some big
Okay.
shoes to fill. So
Jump right
unfortunately, we also have Carrie Hirsch, who's our faculty liaison, who is on as well. And I'm sure everybody read the memo in advance, but it is a nice 2-page memo. So but if you take out the footnotes. And so we have one recommendation this year. And notably, our recommendation is also backed up, is also supported by the Advisory Committee for English Learners, the English Language Arts Committee, as well as the World Language Advisory Committee. So our committee is, our recommendation is quite simple, is that we recommend that APS should increase the amount of social studies instruction at the elementary level. And research has shown an additional 30 minutes of social study instruction per day. Those students outperform others that have had less social study instruction in grades 1 through 5 on 5th grade reading assessment. So, you know, APS elementary schools need to, you know, teach social studies for the recommended amount of time in order to achieve that time commitment, and purposefully integrate the social studies instruction into the English language arts and world language curricula. So APS would join many school districts nationwide in its search for strategies to improve literacy outcomes for its learners. So one thing that our report notes, though, is that anecdotally, there's this perception in APS that social studies is supplemental to core learning subjects like reading and math. And in reality, they're strongly linked with reading. There's a strong link between social studies learning and literacy improvement. If you check out our report, we have a number of sites to that, as well as more information on that. And then there's some also added benefits, whereas integrating social studies curriculum into your literacy instruction can provide more opportunities also for civic engagement. So you help people become more civically involved adults and teenagers. And then I would add one great thing is that the impact on the budget is negligible, because we are utilizing existing curriculum and teachers. So so there's not a minor increased cost, if even minor. So you know, by integrating social studies instruction into lessons plans for reading in all languages taught at APS schools, APS teachers can give their students the recommended additional 30 minutes of instruction without sacrificing reading instruction time. It's likely to help improve reading outcomes. So I will open up the floor to questions, and we fortunately have Carrie here too, who's the expert on this.
Thank you, Todd. Well done.
No, thank you. It's called winging it. It's called winging it. Like Stephen and last time.
We all can appreciate that. Any questions from the floor on this one? I actually, I wonder if we could, if I can ask, and this might be one for Carrie to answer, but if you could speak to just broadly sort of where we are in the system related to sort of cultural sensitivity in the social studies sort of curriculum and instruction, and areas like Virginia studies, which I think sometimes has been a challenging place for instruction, and whether there are opportunities, new opportunities or emerging ways that you all are approaching sort of pedagogy and instruction and content delivery that is sensitive to sort of the cultural diversity of our student population.
Sure. And you're talking, you want me to focus on elementary, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things we've really, okay, so there's a couple layers. One, there were curriculum framework edits in 2020 that came out of the African American History Education Commission. And so we pulled those into the curriculum as required. But in addition to that, we really tried to look at how students, how and when students are introduced to different topics in the curriculum. So thinking of Virginia studies, it's the first time that students are really looking at that concept of enslavement. And so how do we purposefully prior to that build up their perception of African societies prior to that in terms of their achievements and all of the valuable qualities of those societies, so that students, the first time we're introducing them is not to Black culture or to Black people or Africans, is not enslavement. It's the celebration of their empires and the things that they did prior to being enslaved by Europeans. And then when you look at the younger grades, we really tried to look at how you can, how you start talking to students in kindergarten, where their focus is really about community and how do we know that we're similar and different to everybody, and that's okay, and we should love ourselves for who we are. And kind of building on that concept as we move up to first grade, second grade. And then also looking at the lens of traditionally in the curriculum, the students really learned about like Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. And when you even look at the Virginia standards, it's the exact same language throughout those lower elementary grades and even the upper elementary grades. And so we've started work to make sure that we're kind of separating out the activities that students are doing or they're learning that they're doing about different people so that it's more developmentally appropriate. And then we've really been trying to think about bringing in and we've been working with Sarah Cruz and with Lori Silver to really think about diverse books in the classroom on top of any trade books that we have for social studies. So that's just kind of a quick, not so quick. I'm happy to, if you have a more specific thing you want me to address, I'm happy to do that too.
No, thank you. That's great. And so in the chat, Maureen says, I think the recommendation makes sense, but how easy will it be for teachers to transition to more time on social studies? And I would just add to that, Todd, I don't know if you were here when the science committee made their recommendation, but science essentially made the same recommendation, which was more time. And I think they were a little ambitious because they said 45 minutes a day in elementary school science. And so there's just this question around how much time, and maybe this is a question for Bridget or Sarah, how much time is there in the day for English language arts, math, social studies, science, and is there an integration that's possible? Is there?
Yeah. And you know, feel free to hop in, Sarah or Bridget, if you have other things, but we've really been working as core content areas and also with the other content areas in the Office of Academics to start to really, not that we haven't before, but to really focus in, given that, you know, content always keeps getting added and nothing seems to come away. So we've really been trying to look at how do we, instead of we right now have all of our separate curriculum guides, how do we work together to make sure that those are really working in a way that streamlines time? So where there are true overlaps in content, oftentimes the way we've paced our curriculum, they might not line up exactly. And so there may be easy tweaks that we can do that would allow, for example, in third grade, there's performance assessments in both social studies and science, and the state would allow us to use the same assessment for both of those. So what that requires us to do is to make sure we're looking at that curriculum, making sure that we've lined things up in a way that it makes sense that the assessment could have that lens of social studies and science. And then we've also been trying to really work with Sarah Cruz, and she's been supportive in kind of the process they're going through at looking at real content focused books for both science and social studies standards, so that as they're doing, as they're engaging in that structured literacy, they're able to really embed content focused texts in a really purposeful way. So I think what we're advocating for is not to say take away ELA or take away mathematics and add more social studies. It's more making sure that through ELA and through mathematics where appropriate, we're also addressing those science and social studies standards so that students can get more time in that content, even if it's not, we actually prefer it, I think, not to be this like silo of social studies, or I won't speak for science, but silo of science.
Well, and I wonder, Carrie, thank you for that. I wonder, based on what you're saying, if Todd, if you wanted to take it back to the committee to suggest one of the things that might be really helpful would be to explore how parents would recognize that their child is in fact, that there is social studies content being delivered in different sort of subject areas, and that this, that the integrated delivery, it may not be called a social studies, class or section or unit, but in fact, there might be quite a bit of social studies instruction happening. And it would be interesting to know from the committee perspective, what would that look like for parents, or for, to understand and see that as it's happening, because we don't always see it, I think, is one of the challenges that the children maybe see it better than we do. Miles had a question in the chat, and I'm looking at Wendy Pilch on my screen a little bit. What are we doing to make sure that instruction delivery is consistent between schools and even between classes? I'm assuming he means in social studies at the upper levels, because he's asking about it in terms of widely divergent points of view and focus in middle school and high school. So we're going a little off track here, if that's okay. But I wonder if Wendy or Carrie would like to speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, Wendy, if you want.
For secondary, please be my guest.
I figured. So for secondary, we do have common performance assessments that we look at. And, we do have the curriculum that has the learning objectives and targets for students that teachers should be following. That being said, I think that there is variation from teacher to teacher. We try to, allow teachers the use of their professional judgment as long as it falls into the guidelines of the APS curriculum and VDOE standards. That being said, though, I think professional learning is really important. And kind of in that comment, you talk about divergent points of view. And so, I would say we do advocate for teachers to really think about how they are expressing or sharing positions and perspectives in the classroom to make sure that there is kind of factual and evidence-based primary and secondary sources that they're having students look at to come to their own conclusions, and not just telling students what the point of view should be or what the teacher's point of view is. So not sure if that helps at all, but we do try to do walkthroughs. The principals get in buildings as much as they can and call us in if they're noticing anything that needs to be addressed. But we are kind of countywide an office of 2 people that covers K through 12. So it's hard to get in all of those classrooms to see everything, but we try to address it through professional learning and kind of touch points as much as we can.
Carrie, I'd jump in too. I think this is a great role for the collaborative learning team that Shannon introduced us to, and that we see as a through line, particularly at the secondary, in which it would involve teachers of the same content area, right, or the same course, collaborating with one another on delivery of content. And so that leads to consistency of delivery, consistency of pacing, consistency of formative assessments as well. And so that's another checkpoint in this process.
Yeah, that's a great point. And they do that within their schools pretty regularly. And we try to build that in when we meet with them in terms of countywide meetings, which is only once a month, but gets them also a chance to talk to the other teachers of their content area at other schools.
Thank you. I do want to give a shout out to the comment that Belinda Fold put in the chat. She is a teacher. She represents the Teachers Council on Instruction to ACTL, and she put, if you missed it, she wrote, For example, my first grade students were writing about which famous American should be on a coin and why in math. It integrated social studies, persuasive writing, and social studies and persuasive writing and math, I'm guessing, right, Belinda?
Thumbs up she gave.
Thumbs up. Okay. Any other questions or comments on this? And I'm sorry, there was a lot happening in the chat. So if I missed one, please call it out.
And I think just looking at the chat, talking about, do we direct teachers at the beginning of the year, go over goals with them? We definitely talk about areas of focus for the year with them and refresh them and take them through any curriculum updates or changes. We do talk about specific pedagogy that that we highly endorse for social studies. So we certainly do all of those things at the beginning of the year when we see them. We mostly see secondary, though. We don't really get to see elementary teachers very much in social studies.
Carrie, I just wanted to add that from the elementary perspective, we do have a social studies lead teacher at each elementary site, and they do provide a lot of support for teachers as they're planning, and those curriculum documents that your team has worked so hard on for pacing has a lot of opportunities built in there where you're integrating English language arts, science, mathematics, and I do know there is consistency with teachers following those curriculum documents. So it's another area where we're looking to, we certainly can be even more consistent across schools, but that is one place that I am starting to see some consistency with use of those documents.
Anything else? That was a lot, Todd, that just came in. Any comments or thoughts that you have?
I don't have any additional thoughts, Carrie. Thank you for beyond what Carrie. We'll take it back to the committee about what that additional time would look like and kind of flush that out, as well as talk about the fact that science committee came in and swooped in with the same recommendation and how that would work from a timing perspective. But they did they said 45 minutes. We only said 30. So
right. Well,
I will say it varies by grade level because we do have 45 minutes in the upper elementary and 30 minutes in lower elementary.
Right. And I think one of the themes that we've been seeing this year sort of across all the committees, if I can just take, a moment to say, is that there are a lot of opportunities for for different committees to be talking with each other and touching base with each other across the recommendations that they're making. And the recommendations always are strengthened by that conversation where collaboration. And I know you all did that, Todd, with your in your conversations with some of the other committees. So kudos on that. And then, we also just want to calibrate sort of, one of the things I noticed this year, for example, is how many committees have a recommendation related to professional development for teachers. And I sort of at some point thought, well, there can only be so much time and energy and thought and everything that needs to go into professional development. And so, maybe we need to calibrate a little bit across the committees, some of the recommendations that we're making and strengthen them, frankly, by building bridges. So I'll just put in that plug. Thank you to the Social Studies Committee and for all of your work going into the report. I know you had a lot of citations and information in there, which is really helpful. And thank you to Carrie as well.
Thank you.
On our agenda, we are right on time. And on our agenda, I did build in a 5-minute break because this is a little bit of a long meeting. And I'm just wondering if we want that break. It's hard because I can't see a lot of folks. Or if we want to plow ahead. The Student Services Committee will be up next. And I'm looking on my screen for, I see Elisa, and I thought I saw Adora coming in. I like Chris dropped in the chat break so I can fill out my rubrics, and Jenny says plow ahead. Okay, I'm going to take the liberty of saying let's plow ahead. And Chris will forgive you if you fill out your rubrics while we're talking. So we are moving into the Student Services Advisory Committee, and now I see Adora on my screen. Adora, I love that background.
I had a work meeting that needed this, so, and I haven't changed it, sorry.
Adora and I are from the same city. Thank you. So Adora and Elisa, take it away with a brief intro to your recommendations, and then we'll have some questions and discussion. Thank you.
Okay. So our committee, with the Student Services Advisory Committee, we had 4 recommendations. One that we feel is kind of the most crucial, so I'll spend a little extra time on that one. But in general, we would like APS to conduct a full evaluation of student services. A program evaluation of department program services relating to their delivery and approach of SEL, as well as how they're handling the tiered system of supports, and partnering with a third party, an outside third party, to really give a neutral view of what we're doing. Our committee has struggled because we don't really have a great baseline of where we are from a systemic view. There's school by school information. There is, site specific things, but from an overall integrated view, we feel like before we can really get deep into what should we do and where should we go, we need to know, what are we doing overall? What do we have? What are we doing? What do we need? Where are resources being, where are they being used well? Where are they being misaligned? These types of things. So our major recommendation is this evaluation that hasn't been done before, specific to student services. Yes, there was an evaluation of special ed done when student services was under special ed, but it wasn't specific to student services. We find this, and I guess I should kind of back up and say that we find this particular content area to be kind of foundational for our students and for their learning and for what they're doing. A way to support all of the other wonderful recommendations coming out of all the other content areas. So ours is a little different because it's not necessarily a content area, right? It's not a lesson to be learned. When we talk about how APS is dealing with social emotional learning for our students, this is a foundation for building skills in our students that will take them throughout life, really. If you want to reframe them, they're life skills. It's a way to have our students really be able to get the instruction in the other areas, because this is kind of foundational. I think Elisa put it as SEL is kind of a keystone, right? All of the other areas are built around this, but a student's social emotional health, this plays into their mental health, this plays into their ability to learn, it plays into their ability to sit in class and listen, to their integrated social studies and science and math lessons. We see the social emotional learning strategy for APS as something that's kind of overarching and foundational to every content area, and supportive of every content area. But we also can't say as a system what we're doing, where we are, and how impactful we're being with our programs and with the very, lots of resources that student services is throwing out there, we can't get a full, real comprehensive look at what we're doing. So we want them to do an evaluation, a program evaluation of the student services. Yes, we really think it should be, you need to look at everything you're doing and evaluate everything and every single program. But for this recommendation, we're saying specifically the big need is the county's approach to SEL. This is where we want a partnership with CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academics, Social Emotional Learning. They will do an assessment of your school district. So they will come in, they will evaluate everything you have. They will come talk to all the people. They'll talk to the C-suite, as I call them. They will talk to the teachers, the principals, the administrators, students, parents. They'll put together, they'll do a deep dive of research of looking at where we are. And they will come back with some recommendations based on their body of research over the years in working with other school districts. They have worked with several large school districts in implementing successful programs, and we feel that APS should partner with them and get that outside review also of our programs. So it's kind of a two-tiered evaluation, right? Your internal, led by planning and evaluation, program evaluation, which hasn't been done. It's done on every other, it's done in all the departments. It just has never been done in student services. To get an inventory of where we are, what we're doing, what we need, et cetera. And then have CASEL come in and do this outside review to really give us some targeted strategic recommendations of how we implement and how we put in a framework to move forward with a comprehensive and system-wide SEL kind of framework that we can, have across the system, where we're not looking at different and, inconsistent. I think this consistency is a common theme, and it is in this area too. There isn't consistency across schools on how the schools are, how versed they are, right? If a principal loves SEL, then that school is going to have a culture that really embraces SEL and reaps a lot of the benefits of that. If a principal does not, it's not a priority, then it's not a priority, and it's going to show in areas like your student discipline numbers and, a lot of times student behavior and how much support students need, how much elevated support students need. So we want we want APS to get to a point where we're consistently having the experience with student services. And I hate to call it student services because this work really is everybody's work, right? Everybody needs to be, from the school board down to the, bus drivers. Everybody in APS really needs to be well-versed and steeped in able to model these lessons of, or the skills that come about with social emotional learning. And it's things like self-awareness and social awareness, relationship building skills, decision-making and self-management skills. These skills are skills that, if anybody here is in HR, you're hiring managers, you're looking for those skills when you're hiring people to come into your organizations. So we want to build these crucial skills in our students, but we also want to build it in our staff and our teachers and everybody that's facing our students. To kind of pile onto that, our second recommendation is to adopt the Virginia Department of Education's new standards around SEL. And I think it's probably more, important now to do that sooner rather than later, considering the change in administration that we have and the fact that the VDOE is probably going to be shifting. And we don't know, we don't believe that the shift are going to be members that really embrace or understand the value of this work. So we feel like adopting these standards before they change might be beneficial to the state. But it's really just another reinforcement that we believe in these support, this foundational support for students, and really saying we embrace the Virginia standards. The main point of Virginia standards, there's a lot to it. There's curriculum things, and there are other areas, but the main point of the Virginia standards is that social emotional learning is not a program. It is not a lesson. It is not a class. It is kind of a way of being. It's like a fiber that needs to be fed throughout your school system. So it needs to show up in everything. People need to be, so that means professional development, more professional development. That means, modeling, that means providing resources to not just the students, but the teachers and staff and community. Those are things that come out of fully adopting or fully embracing the Virginia standards. Understanding that we don't know.
Sorry, I just want to jump in because I want to make sure that we get time for questions. So can we move quickly to the third and fourth ones?
Sure. The third recommendation is to address student sources of stress, trauma, and other challenges to student mental health well-being. I think that it falls directly under SEL, but also public awareness of the skill sets and the programs that are already within APS and the deployment of them. So there are 2 pages of great reading there. Recommendation 4 is to adjust the staffing of school psychologists and social workers to allow for a full-time psychologist and full-time social worker assigned to each elementary school. We included middle, high school, and alternatives, but it is the elementary schools that now are sharing social workers and school psychologists. And we feel that you just can't schedule when you're going to have a crisis with a student or family. You can't just say, I'm sorry, no one's here today. They'll check in again on Thursday. Can you come back? Right? We need to be present in this day and time with the just the life crises that are happening within our community that we've witnessed in the last 2 years and that we continue to witness. So we just feel as a matter of equity, all schools need to have a dedicated school psychologist and a dedicated social worker. And that's where we are. We'd like our schools to be places that are safe and healthy workplaces, not toxic workplaces. So SEL will apply to everyone within the framework, the structure, and the employment and volunteers of APS.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sharice made a comment in the chat that said, sounds like a significant culture shift. And Sharice, I don't know if you want to speak to that, or if there's a question there.
No, there isn't a question there. I agree with the recommendation, and I agree with the importance of beginning to bake these ideas and concepts into the culture of APS, because I don't think that it's fully there. I think it's there in stovepipes, and I think it's there in silos, and I think it's very fragmented, and I think it's inconsistent from building to building. So it would be a big shift. And maybe this evaluation is a way to kickstart that.
And it goes along with, I guess, kind of the shift that's already starting to happen anyway toward equity, toward more, cultural sensitivity, et cetera, throughout the schools. So it's a needed shift.
Other questions? I wanted to ask, what is actually involved in, sorry, let me just get the right number here. Recommendation number 2, what formally adopt. So what is it that is needed for API? Like, what is the actual mechanism? Is it the school board? Is it the superintendent? Is it what is involved with the actual formally adopting?
The school board voting to follow those guidelines would be, I guess, the formal thing. But for us, I guess it's more saying we're making the commitment. So if the school board votes that we're going to adopt these standards, that there's more that's going to come out of it. They're going to guide those standards along with the evaluation will guide exactly what we do. But it's really just saying we are committed to fully baking SEL and these types of programs and lessons and this cultural shift into our system. So it's probably more of a statement. Make the statement, make the commitment. But our bigger need is that evaluation.
Sure. Thank you. Okay. Other questions? Sarah Evans.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify on the last recommendation to make sure I understand that correctly. To have at least one social worker and one psychologist at each school, and that really is going to be a change at the elementary schools. I think I was looking in the report and it said right now high schools have 2 at each, and so the recommendation is not to decrease that number in order to shift over to elementary. It's keep high schools at their current level and then add.
Yes.
And if the choice were, well, you can't have that, but we're willing to shift and decrease high school, that wouldn't be the idea.
No, our the ask was to add staff so that they can fully cover the elementary schools. It wouldn't be to take away from the high schools. I mean, I would suspect that a high school counselor would have to have a very different skill set than or a psychologist would have to have a different skill set than an elementary school one.
For sure, yes. And funding wise, I just wanted to make sure that the idea wasn't,
Right. Sarah, thank you. I think that the wording should be allow for a minimum of 1 full-time.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, not to deplete, but to add to.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll jump on with Sarah's question just to play devil's advocate for a moment and say, if budget stood in the way, what is the difference in the role at the elementary school level with the psychologists and the social workers, and such that how would one prioritize whether if it was possible to increase one of those roles to one at every elementary school while continuing to share one? What would that look like?
You mean, so you're saying the difference? I'm not following. I don't think I followed. Is it the difference between the social worker and the psychologist and what they do, or is it at the different levels of what they do?
No, in the elementary schools, what the psychologists do, what the social workers do.
Okay.
And therefore, if we had to prioritize one over the other in terms of those roles.
Mm-hmm.
So among other things, the school psychologists participate in 504 and IEP meetings for the identification and evaluation of students who may have extraordinary or special needs. Mm-hmm. And termination is profoundly important to the outcomes of the long-term education of a child. And the social workers help to build community engagement, family support, and family strengthening so that school remains a high value and a highly important value of community life, as well as helping them to address basic needs in our communities. So whether they're dealing with housing or unemployment, whether they need food, shelter, there's a huge demand for social workers' time. And they also contribute to in-school counseling of students with challenges and behaviors. So they play different roles, they support each other, but they are clearly different in their areas of expertise and the roles they do play. Thank you.
So Lisa, I see Wendy's hand is up. Wendy, do you want to jump in?
Hi, Wendy.
Yeah, hi. I was just going to add that would be Sophie's choice since they're both equally valuable. I did want to add one other role of the school psychologist is counseling as a related service for our students that have that written into their IEPs. So I wanted to make sure we didn't leave that out.
Thank you.
We think it's hard to prioritize one over the other in that arena, especially given the fact that the county's resources are, stretched to the, thin, and the county is not able to, step in and provide the wraparound services as much. So
I'm not sure if folks on this call know, but since the middle of December, Department of Human Services has been operating on a crisis-only basis, emergency needs. So they have no surplus capacity to help students unless it is a true life safety crisis. So the schools need to stand up their own support system and not think that they can just rely by shunting them off to DHS. They need to provide it during the school day on the school premises and with true attention to the actual personal need and not wait until it becomes a crisis situation. We need to intercede early in the process, not wait till it's an emergency and 911 is called. Thank you.
Thanks, Elisa. I want to just do one more question from the chat. Chris posted a question about sort of how do we know that the 12 psychologists and social workers at the elementary level would be fully utilized? In other words, what information do we have about the demand that's there?
Well, right now, we don't have that data. Is that a common response for all of our committees? Yes, because this department has never had an evaluation. Subject matters got evaluations, but not the service side of the school structure. So I think that an evaluation is really a critical part of that to discern what the workloads are, what the demands are, what the needs are. At the moment, the conversation is that school psychologists and social workers are burned out and fried by the demands placed upon them. And that alone is enough for me to say this recommendation is important. And so there may be a variation after an evaluation, but right now, I would say that as a triage method, we need to address the immediate need post-COVID.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks to Adora and Elisa and all of your committee. I know you all worked really hard to put this together, and there's a lot of really great information in here. I am going to move us along to our final committee of the evening. And I know I saw Kate, there she is on my screen. Kate Merrill is here for the English Language Arts Advisory Committee.
Bethany, do I have the ability to share my screen?
I can do that in just one moment. Let's see. Okay, yes.
And Charisse, my co-chair, is here as well. And I think I saw Lori Silver and Sarah Cruz. So team, feel free to hop in at any point. Okay, let's see here.
Is it working, Kate? Oh yeah, there we go.
Yes, okay, so I guess you can see that now.
Yes.
Okay, so what Bethany shared with everyone in her email was actually our preliminary report that we gave to the school board in November, which presented 4 topics that we were considering to draw recommendations from. So what I wanted to share with you all tonight was just what our thinking is right now around those topics and what recommendations we believe we are coming to, which we'll give to the school board later in the spring. So these were the topics that we were looking at in November. The first 2 are around structured literacy, and I'm really excited that APS has made a lot of progress in this area. There is a resource allocation process that is taking place throughout the spring. So there will be new resources aligned for structured literacy, not just across K-5, but K-12 for the next school year. So we're really excited about that. We do still have some wonders and some concerns around accountability of implementing those resources when they come, but we are really excited that as of next year at least, Lucy Calkins will no longer be the primary resource in elementary school, and structured literacy will be what we do. So that is based on recommendations that we had given in the past, and we're moving in the right direction there. So these last 2 topics is where our recommendations for this year will likely land, and it's around writing and class sizes in secondary English classes because of what we hope to see happen with writing. So I want to expand on that just a little bit. So the topic of quantity and quality of student writing in secondary grades builds on recommendations that our committee has made in the past. In 2019, our committee collected data from recent APS graduates, and what we found was that they felt wholly unprepared for the rigors of college writing, and gave us some specific recommendations around what they wish they had had when they were students at APS. And then anecdotal evidence that we hear from students and parents, and from many of you that are on this call right now, is that writing instruction is pretty inconsistent across APS. And as is the giving of high quality and actionable feedback to students. And we've also heard that this has been exacerbated by COVID. So this is something that we're still really concerned about. APS has made some progress, because like I said, this has been a recommendation in the past. There's new platforms that are enabling the ELA department to track and monitor student progress. There is some professional learning that is taking place around the research-backed strategies of the writing revolution. And one of our recommendations last year was that APS require teachers to use some of the high quality resources that already exist across classrooms, specifically Step Up to Writing. So these are things that are happening. However, there's still some progress that's needed. Like I said earlier, across the board, we've just heard, and I think we've observed with our own children, that writing instruction is just very inconsistent, and that students are not always receiving feedback. And more often than not, if we hear a story that someone is getting really great feedback from their writing teacher, it's rare. There's also not very many opportunities for students to write longer pieces of writing that require multiple drafts and rounds of feedback. And that is the type of writing that they're going to be expected to do in college and career. There's also not a wide variety of writing tasks across the genres. And accountability around any of this is just still very unclear, which probably leads to the inconsistency that we're seeing, not just across schools, but even across classrooms within the same school. So class sizes in secondary English is what is going to, reducing those class sizes, we believe is probably what's going to help APS to accomplish some of the things that we hope they will accomplish with writing. This is something that we stated in our preliminary report, just a quick calculation, an estimate of how long it would take English teachers to actually grade and give actionable feedback on a lengthy writing assignment. And you can see, I mean, this is kind of a low end estimate, assuming that a high school teacher only sees 100 students per week, and that it only takes 30 minutes to grade and give feedback on an assignment. You're looking at more than an additional week's worth of full-time work that it would take for the teacher to do that for one assignment. So we think it's critical that the class sizes have to be manageable so that teachers have enough time to give that type of feedback and individual student attention. So the APS class size report that came out, I believe in December, showed the number of secondary classes across the board that have 27 or more students. And there's quite a few of them. In grades 6 through 8, there are 15 English classes that have more than 27 students. And across 9 through 12, there are 42 English classes that have 27 or more students. And the VDOE guidelines state that secondary English classes should be capped at 24. So if that report only showed us what was more than 27, we can imagine there's probably more that have more than 24. So we've requested that data around class sizes or APS English classes that are above 24. We haven't received it yet, but we hope that we will. And when we do, or if we do, that would be something that will be included in our recommendations. So our likely recommendations are this. We believe that APS must adopt a rigorous continuous writing curriculum in grades 6 through 12 that reflects sufficient writing quantity, quality, and diversity so that every student masters the fundamental writing skills required to be college and career ready. Aligned to this, APS also has to provide professional learning for teachers around said curriculum. And that professional learning also has to include some training on how to give actionable, timely, and high quality feedback to students. And of course, the secondary English classes should be capped at 24 students. This matters primarily because in a public school system, no parent should have to pay for outside tutoring for their students to leave the school system ready for the rigors of college writing. That's not a feasible demand on families, and it shouldn't be necessary. But what we're finding is that for our students to be ready, a lot of people have to go outside of APS, and that's just not acceptable. A consistent, rigorous, and research-based curriculum is the most consistent way that we can shrink performance disparities. And those smaller class sizes will help teachers have the time to give more consistent feedback and give that individualized attention. So that's where we expect our recommendations to land. And now I'm going to stop talking because I'd love to hear your questions, thoughts, or feedback.
Thanks, Kate. Can we go back?
Oh, do you want me to go back to my recommendations?
No, that's fine. No, sorry, I was going back to full screen. And I'm just checking the chat. I couldn't see it during the while the presentation was up. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. I actually had one, and I don't know, you said 15 middle school classes and 42 high school English classes, but I didn't know, is that out, what's the N out of how many are there of those? In other words, is it 42 out of 45, or is it like 42 out of 100 or 42 out of, do you see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're saying, and I'm not sure, and I'm not even sure that that was in the class size report. I'd have to go back and look at that. The class size report just, there was a grid that showed the number of classrooms that have 27 plus students. And so it didn't even list all classes because there are some classes that don't have more than that. So I'm really not sure about that.
But that's something that hopefully we'll be able to get from Lori, and we can add that to our recommendation because it makes sense, so that to give people some context and perspective of what the whole is. But it, even without that, it's still a significant number. You've got 42 classes across the district where, there's so many students that a teacher could not, even if they wanted to, give them really deep and appropriate writing feedback, so that even if it was 42 out of 45, it would be a huge problem. If it was 45 out of 2,000, it's still a problem that needs to be addressed.
I think you're right, Sharice, and also the question of whether there's patterns with certain schools and larger class sizes, right? But I also wonder if is there a difference? Do we see? And I don't know if staff have this answer, or but with AP classes versus non-AP classes?
So I can say anecdotally that we hear, like, the writing instruction becomes very rigorous in the IB program. So I think that there are programmatic differences, but I believe that too varies. But Lori, I'm sorry, I think I cut you off.
No, your timing was perfect, Kate. That's absolutely true. And the expectations of writing in those classes is different based upon the expectations of that specific program as well. And as it was written in the chat as well, depending upon that too, is the number of students that are also in those classes based upon the demand. So it's like you have more students in those classes, they're requesting those classes, and then the rigor of the writing is also different than, say, a gen ed English 9, 10, 11, 12. Thanks, Kate.
Well, and of course, we don't want to rely on AP classes in order to prepare students for college. So
exactly. Writing is something like there should be high quality, rigorous writing instruction across the board, and not just for students that are in AP classes or in the IB program.
Right. And families also shouldn't have to game the system in that way, where you're like, okay, I need to kind of push my child through this gauntlet, of AP courses and IP courses. So you're loading your kids up and they're taking 3, 4, 5 AP courses just to get the education that they need to qualify for college. And we at APS should be able to provide that level of rigor with or without AP. I mean, we have schools in the district that are basically AP schools. So you look at what they're teaching and it's overwhelmingly the kids are just taking AP courses. And that should be an indication that there is some sort of disconnect in how we're educating and where that education is happening, and how families even understand that if you take non-intensive courses in APS and that's all you take, that when you start to apply to college, you're basically going to be non-competitive. And I think that that shouldn't be the case. I think that you should be able to take a normal course load and be prepared for college. But right now we've got some imbalances and some inequities because that information isn't fully known across all families.
Thanks, Sharice. Let me jump to Dima's question in the chat and then to Jenny, who has her hand up. So Dima's question was whether the same issue presents itself in elementary school. Some classes are 27 or more students in a class, or are there other instructors coming in to help with writing, especially in the upper elementary school grades? So I don't know if Sarah or Lori, you want to jump in on that.
Yeah, I'll jump to that one. And I think when we talk about writing in elementary school, they're just starting to develop, and 4th and 5th is where we see them start writing some lengthier pieces, 5 paragraphs, 6 paragraphs, or like small books and things like that. But we'll take, for example, the 5th grade writing assessment, and we're really bringing in a whole team approach to score it. So the burden of all the students' essays don't land on just the one teacher. We did a joint training, professional learning with the reading specialists and the RTGs, so that they could, as a team, talk with the 5th grade teachers to really share that assessment of student writing amongst the whole team. And especially when we're talking about teachers that are departmentalized. So they have an ELA and social studies teacher partnered with the math and science teacher. Well, the math and science teacher is getting that training on how to use the rubric and score the writing so that they can each take, a certain amount of papers. And I was just at Nottingham today, and they said that it was a really good training that they talked through with the 5th grade teaching team, and they want to pull in the 4th grade to kind of start aligning so that the 4th grade teachers know and can do the same thing. So there's conversations, but I think when we look at the elementary schools, even if the classes are larger, when we do some of our writing feedback, that they can pull together, and there's lots of people who jump in and take shared responsibility of the student writing.
Thanks, Sarah. Jenny, do you still have a question? Oh, we lost you, Jenny. Can you unmute?
There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you. It was just easier to ask. So I agree. I love everything that you said and agree with both the rationale and from my own observation so far as the parent of a 10th grader. My question is taking the classes down to a cap of 24, is that enough? With the sort of the formula you used and the impossibility of I think it was 50 hours just to grade one particular assignment, or to give feedback on one particular assignment, is taking that down to 45 or 40 hours, is that enough? Is it still impossible, just not as impossible?
I think that's a really valid question. And I wonder the same thing. I mean, I think we're saying 24 because that might be all that's realistic right now. But I don't know if it's enough. I think that there are ways that teachers can learn creative strategies to give feedback. And maybe, there's certain tasks that get feedback, or maybe you're giving feedback around a certain standard in a particular task. So that, depending on what the assignment is, the feedback that you're giving looks different. So I think like if teachers are well-versed in different types of feedback to give and when, that's what's really going to help cut down on the hours that it takes to give that feedback. And I think that there's also, we were talking about cross-curricular collaboration earlier. There could also be more people that are involved in giving writing feedback, because writing is something that's actually a part or should be a part of all content areas. So no, I don't know that lowering it down to 24 is enough without something else, without another strategy to help teachers give feedback in a consistent way.
And I'll just chime in a little bit, and then I'm sure Lori has some more to say about it too. In another district that I was participated in and helped to lead some of this work, there's a really great thin book called Papers, Papers, Papers by Carol Jago. And just like Kate was saying, it trains teachers on how to just assess one part of the writing. Like maybe this piece, we're only looking at your organization. We're not going to look at your organizational elaboration, your spelling, grammar, mechanics, all that, because that's what adds on when you're looking at all the multiple lenses. That's what makes it really difficult. But that's like a professional learning piece. Another piece is partnering with other content areas, and sitting together, the social studies and the English teacher, talking through a piece so that they can kind of train and know what they're looking for, so that it doesn't always land on the ELA teacher to give feedback for all the writing. Because like we saw with that quote, it's really impossible. You can't load on to a teacher another 40-hour work week just to grade all the papers.
Thanks. And we've been talking, Sarah and I talk about this almost every day. And when we also talk with the social studies department about this almost every day as well. Such a high leverage writing activity for our students is writing across all the content areas all day in their academic day. And so with the writing revolution, like Kate discussed, is something we plan on implementing with our teachers. That appeals so well to very simple, very powerful writing exercises that teachers can use in any content area with students at any time to teach them how to be powerful writers. And then it lends itself to disciplinary literacy too, for math, social studies, science, fine arts, students' interests, and prepares them for their post-secondary world too. So Sarah and I have ambitious plans for K-12, working with the other content areas as well, making sure that we have access to other content area teachers to really have a more intersecting global perspective of writing and literacy for our students. And we're very excited to work in our partnerships with the other content supervisors too. Everyone is very open to that, very excited about that.
Thank you so much. I think that probably brings us to the end of our time. Oh, I see. I see a comment from Miles as part of the problem with the fact that almost all papers are now online, so it may be harder for teachers to write comments inside the written work, or some may be more adept at it than others. And since papers are online, it makes it harder for parents to help and see the feedback. I'm sort of laughing because my child loses all her papers, but does not lose her laptop. So I am actually happy that her papers are online. But I don't know, Sarah, Lori, Kate, have you heard of any, differential there in terms of the literal hard copy paper versus online paper and the ability to do feedback?
I think that was definitely a challenge during COVID, of that interactivity of passing the paper. We've also talked about just in terms of scoring students' papers holistically. We now have everything so digitized that grading is digitized, the feedback process is digitized, and it can be challenging. As challenging as it might be to write comments, is to type comments, make sure that it's where they need to be on a student's writing piece, making sure that a conference happens with the student about the comments so they can then take that feedback, improve upon it, go through a writing cycle process. And teachers have commented that it's a different way of looking at the means by which we give feedback. And it's also the accountability, not just putting the comments in, but ensuring students are internalizing that information at the same time. And so we were working on that. Sarah and I also talk a lot about where is the piece of handwriting, because handwriting, having a pen in hand, encoding manually, does stimulate areas of the brain that are very important for literacy. And what does that mean for high school students? They need to have pens in hands and writing. And how do we work towards still having that element in terms of our writing process? So the answer is yes, we're hearing about those challenges. Yes, they are happening. And yes, we're trying to find the best middle ground for all of that to occur, to be really productive for our kids.
Okay, thank you. So Charisse and Kate and Sarah and Lori, thank you so much. And please thank your committee What I think we might do, Kate and Sharice, with your agreement is I will follow up with all of the ACTL reps, and we'll hold doing rubrics until a little later in the spring. Does that work? So you have your recommendations, because what we did send out was the 4 sort of topic areas, but it's a little hard to sort of rate those. So we can hold completing rubrics for the English Language Arts Advisory Committee and do that, in April or May or whenever it is that you're ready for us to do that. Does that works? Okay.
Yeah, that would be great. Right now,
Okay.
before the ones that I just presented in the presentation, I'm happy to send out to everyone as well as a PDF. But we're still waiting on a little bit of data before we make them final. But hopefully that'll be within the next few weeks.
Okay, sounds good. And we do still have 2 more committees going in April, and so maybe we can kind of flag it at that point. We will have the English learners and the School Health Advisory Board presenting in April, so we could sort of circle back then and remind everybody about the English Language Arts recommendations at that time, if that works. Perfect. If the timing works out. Okay, so let me just wrap us up for this evening. I wanted to, first of all, thank everybody. This was a lot of content this evening and lots of materials sent in advance for you to look at. And I will be asking you all to complete rubrics for 3 out of the 4 committees. And we'll send a reminder in about a week to get those completed and done so that we can try to turn comments around to the committee chairs. For those committees that went in February, I am very close to sending you the comments, the rubric ratings from those. We had a few late arrivals, and so I want to make sure we get those in and send them to you. In terms of upcoming topics, I just wanted to flag a few things that will be coming our way in April and May. So as I just said, we will have 2 final committees in April. I hope we also will have at least a brief just conversation about the budget. Bridget, we haven't talked about that yet, but I think that, just kind of a quick overview about sort of what's in the budget in terms of teaching and learning would be helpful. And then we could also talk, and then we have potentially the homework and grading policy coming forward for discussion with ACTL at the April meeting. We'll see if it stays on, if that timing stays on track for that. And then we also hope by May to talk a little bit about accelerated learning, and I think, plans for the coming year in that area. And then we will have, as you all know, the school board is shortly going to be acting on the school board committee advisory policy on advisory committees. And we are hard at work behind the scenes on the PIPs for ACTL. And so we will be bringing a set of PIPs related to the council and our subcommittees, hopefully by May. Yes, Bridget,
just
yes.
Harkening back to budget, just to remind everybody that the academics work session, budget work session is on March 15th from 6:30 to 8:30. So folks want to tune in, or it is recorded.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I meant to look that up to see when that one was happening so I could share that out. Anything else, Bridget, that we should be announcing? I think that's it. Oh, there is a math resource adoption opportunity coming up. Oh gosh.
It's March 16th at Kenmore, and Sarah, help me. I know it goes until 6. I think it's from 1 to 6.
I think it was from 1 to 6. Yeah.
And it's there won't be presentations by vendors, but the materials that are being considered will be there for folks to peruse.
Right. And I have a flyer coming to me from the math office that I will send out for you all to share with your communities. We're just waiting for translation on it. So that should be in the next couple of days, I hope. And so with that, I think that we are done for tonight. Thank you, everybody, for hanging in with us. And we will see you all next month, if not sooner. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you so much.